Welcome to the PCN Capitol Preview. I'm Larry Casper. Election 2024 is our topic today. Join our discussion by calling us at 1-877-PA6-5001 or text us at 717-219-4001. But first, we're joined by Berwood Yost, Director, Floyd's Institute for Opinion Research at Franklin and Marshall College. President Biden's approval rating was at the bottom of your October poll. What does he have to work on in order to win re-election this year?
Morning, Larry. We did a review of all our polling in 2023 and tried to distill some of the major elements that are going to trend lines that we're going to have to look at to kind of understand what's going to happen in 2024. And at the top of our list, as you suggest, was the president's approval rating. It averaged about 29% positive approval, which is really low. And in fact, if you're a Democrat, you're very concerned about the way Pennsylvania voters are judging the president and the way he's done his job. And really, the problem isn't just that he's unpopular with Republicans, as you would expect. It's that many of the constituencies that helped elect him in Pennsylvania in 2020, younger people, minority voters, those who are progressive and liberal voters, his job approval ratings among those folks have declined substantially by more than 20 points, in fact, since he was elected. So he's got to do the first thing I think he has to do to prepare for 2024 is to elevate his status and the assessment of his job performance among his base voters. And then, of course, try to expand from there. But that's got to be job one, Larry, getting his base back together so that he can have a solid base on which to run.
Well, Berwood, let's consider the Republican primary for president. Your poll last October showed a commanding lead for Donald Trump. And what factors are at work that could affect that lead? After all, that was a few months ago.
Yeah, Larry, look, the dynamic in that Republican primary was really interesting. Last April, Ron DeSantis was actually within about 6 points of Donald Trump in a primary matchup. Since that time, Donald Trump's lead has grown substantially, where his numbers here show him leading both Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley by a substantial margin. And as we saw last night in Iowa, it's pretty clear that Donald Trump is going to be the Republican nominee for president in 2024. So the trends that we saw nationwide, the patterns that we saw evolve in Iowa last night suggest the same thing's happening in Pennsylvania. And we're going to have a rematch between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Now, what's interesting, Larry, is although Trump's standing among Republicans really has returned to where it was when he was president, his standings among the rest of the electorate hasn't changed much. In fact, if we looked at his personal favorability ratings among the state's voters, they are virtually identical to what they were prior to the 2020 election. So something like 58% of voters view him unfavorably versus about 41% that view him favorably. So even though he's really solidified his base, he hasn't expanded his popularity outside that base.
Is there any idea at this point, Berwood, what Donald Trump has to do in order to expand his popularity beyond his current base? Please.
Well, I think the main issue has to do with independent voters and what will happen to them. I think the other part of this is that though we're going to have a Biden-Trump rematch in 2024, there's a substantial number of voters who don't like either candidate. Something like 20% of voters say they have an unfavorable opinion of both of those candidates. And I think that's really the group that's going to decide this election. All the pre-election polling we see so far shows that the race is very tight. And so what happens to those disapprovers, as we like to call them, people who don't like either Trump or Biden? At the moment, most of those people say they're going to vote for a third-party candidate. But I think the success for Biden or Trump will be judged by how well they do with those disapprovers. Can they win some of them back? and really build on the bases that they have to succeed.
Have criminal charges against Trump had an effect on his candidacy?
Well, they seem to have helped him in the Republican primary and among Republican voters, as we said earlier. But I think it's pretty clear that many independents, particularly, view the behavior of President Trump negatively. I think 60% of independent voters say what happened on January 6th was a crime and that Trump's behavior was criminal. That's what they were saying last time we polled them. And I think that potentially has an impact on his ability to attract those very voters he needs to get over the top. I think if there's one possibility that helps him, it's the potential for there to be several third-party candidates on the ballot. I think, given what we said earlier about the unpopularity of both these candidates, that the way the ballot shapes up in Pennsylvania in 2024 and the number of third-party candidates could have a real effect on who carries the state.
All right, Berwood Yost, Director of Floyd's Institute for Opinion Research at Franklin and Marshall College. Thank you.
My pleasure, Larry. Have a good day.
More Capitol Preview after a short break.
Experience communities in action through lively and in-depth discussions on Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs. Join host Chris Kapp and his guests as they discuss important and timely issues from around the state. Gain valuable insight as experts share their thoughts on topics that matter most to you and your family. Get inspired to make a difference in your community by tuning in to Inside Pennsylvania Boroughs on Sundays right here on PCN.
Did you know you can watch all of your favorite PCN originals and more at home or on the go? Download the PCN app on your favorite device and tune in to see what makes Pennsylvania's heart beat. Watch videos on demand, see multiple live streams, and check out the free selected programs and events. PCN, Pennsylvania Politics and Policy, History and Culture, Sports, and more.
Welcome back to the PCN Capitol Preview. Our guests are Brit Crampsie of Brit Crampsie Communications and Chris Nicholas of Eagle Consulting. Brit, we'll start with you. Just how motivated are Pennsylvanians to cast their votes this year?
Sure. I think we're tepidly motivated now. The presidential election has seemed so far away for so long, and we've had great distance from Donald Trump. But as he starts reappearing in Pennsylvania, we see ads about him. We start talking about him again as a real contender or option for the presidency. I think Pennsylvanians are again going to be motivated to turn out and make sure he does not ascend to the Oval Office again.
What do you think, Chris? How much excitement is out there for this election?
Well, Larry and Brittany, good to be with you this morning, the morning after the great Eagles debacle. So I think there will be a lot of enthusiasm this year, Larry. We have a full slate. The entire state house, half of the state Senate who was running for the first time in their new districts, all of Congress, all three of our row offices, Attorney General, Auditor General, and Treasurer. All three will be, I think, well contested, plus a big-time U.S. Senate race, plus the presidency. So I think if you have Brittany and I back in mid-October, everyone's going to be complaining about all the ads they're seeing. But I think at the end of the day, Pennsylvania will again, for a variety of reasons, have strong turnout in November.
Let's consider this. What kind of mood are Pennsylvanians in since 2020?
I think a lot of people are, what's that great word, disgruntled? I don't know what the opposite of disgruntled is, but disgruntled. Yeah, it's just and the old time numbers in polling used to be, Larry, that people upset in bad times meant bad things for the incumbent. But we've entered kind of a new normal, and people always being upset and perturbed and disgruntled. So we've kind of thrown that on its head, because if you look at the polling numbers, what we call the right direction, wrong track numbers, that would tell you that Biden is on his way to a Mondale-esque defeat this fall. But that's not the case, nor will it be the case.
So as far as a new normal is concerned, how about the mail-in ballot? Now, it's been legal, of course, in Pennsylvania for several years, but I'm interested in monitoring just how popular is it? Is it really catching on, and how significant is it to the final outcome?
Well, I haven't voted in person since mail-in voting was legalized, so I can say that it's not likely that I'll go vote in person again. And I think a lot of people are doing it. It's an easy option. It allows you to get your ballot in ahead of whatever may happen on election day. You know, we may see a storm like what we have had today with Chris and I on Zoom here. If you didn't vote ahead of time, you might not be able to get to the polls. So I like it as that option. And what we saw in the judicial elections last year were numbers racking up for Democrats well ahead of the election. So we were able to see this huge margin that Dems are able to put up on mail-in voting even before election day. It's definitely growing in popularity with one side of the playing field here, but I'm not so sure that Republicans are picking it up yet. But as we've seen, they're suffering for that.
Well, look, Larry, I always remind people when we talk about mail-in balloting, it's the same election. There's only one election, whether you vote 3 weeks in advance, 2 days in advance, or the actual day. What's very clear, and I saw this in polling I did across the state in 2020, for a variety of reasons, Democrats are much more into mail-in balloting than Republicans. Independents are kind of in between. That's neither good nor bad. It just is, as long as you vote. For people out there who can only vote by mail, or that's the best way, please go for it. If you have another option, voting in person demonstrably puts less stress on the system. And since all of our Democratic friends remind us all the time about we don't want to overstress the system, think about that when you decide how to vote. But essentially, Brittany and I would agree that the most important thing is just to exercise your franchise regardless of the method.
One more question for Chris before we take our next phone call. After past elections, Republicans have challenged mail-in results, and now Republicans are tending to embrace it. Why the change?
Well, I think a lot of the efforts to discredit mail-in balloting, were off on a tangent. Okay, just because you lose mail-in balloting doesn't mean you can lose the election. Our two Republican statewide elected row officers, the state treasurer and the auditor general, they both lost the mail-in ballot portion in 2020, but won overall. So I'm glad to see that my party has gone from actively opposing it to at least embracing it. I think the issue will be for Republicans is that we're just not into it. So I don't know how much we're going to gain, but again, we have to do some persuasion, Larry, not just more get out the vote.
Britt, I interrupted you. Go ahead, please.
Oh, that's all right. Well, one of the reasons that Republicans aren't voting by mail, and I think Chris touched on it a little bit, is that Republicans have told them not to, that it's fraudulent. They've, purported all of these theories about trucks of mail-in ballots coming from other states and being dumped in Philadelphia. So of course, if they think that this system is invalid or fraudulent, they're not going to participate. But that's just not the case. So I think they have a marketing effort ahead of them. But I also think that instead of focusing on a strain to the system, the state can invest more in that system to make it run a little smoother, a little bit faster. If we paid county elections offices a little bit more, they were able to upgrade their systems, upgrade their software, their hardware, pay their workers a little bit more, pay poll workers a little bit more, allow them to pre-canvass. I mean, there are minor improvements that we can make. They aren't going to strain the system, but I don't think that anyone should choose their method of voter participation by what their county is going to have to do. No matter how you cast your ballot, it's going to be counted.
Viewers, you'd like you to call us at 1-877-PA65001 or text us at 717-219-4001. Here's our first phone call. It's from Bucks County. Christine, you're on PCN. Oh, Christine's gone. Try us later, Christine, if you would. Guests, let's consider some of the specific races that are out there. And Chris, you whetted our appetite with some races and saying, of course, Congress and president races are out there. So let's consider Congressional District number 10. That's the one where the incumbent is Scott Perry. Now, there are lawsuits, as both of you know, that are trying to remove him from the ballot. And can you summarize, what are those allegations?
Well, the allegations are that a la President Bush, President Trump. He's not eligible to be on the ballot because of the 14th Amendment. I think until we get some direction from the U.S. Supreme Court on the challenges to Trump, the challenge to Perry will not go anywhere. That district, the 10th, parts of it are trending more Republican, parts of it are trending more Democratic. In 2010, Scott Perry won with about 54% of the vote. This year, it's pretty clear that Democrats think that's an opportunity for them as they have a whole bunch of candidates running in their primary. I think 8, including a well-known, now former television news personality. So I think voters in the 10th district should get ready to see a lot of political ads from Democrats running in this district, and it will be a competitive race.
Will Perry have someone to run against in the primary?
I've not heard anything about that yet. Petition season starts a week from today, Larry, as you both know. Anyone trying to get on the ballot in Pennsylvania has to go out and talk to their friends and neighbors of the same party and get petition signatures signed, agreeing with them to put them on the ballot. So we'll know better in the next couple of weeks who exactly is running, because we'll hear that they are what's called circulating petitions.
So, Brit, what do you think of this lawsuit that, in effect, alleges Perry blocked transfer of power from Trump to Biden?
Sure. I think there's a lot of merit here. When you are elected as a member of Congress, you take an oath of office, and part of that oath is to uphold the Constitution. The Constitution lines out the peaceful transfer of power, our system of elections, and Perry very clearly tried to interfere with that. So he, I do believe, has violated his oath. As a Democrat who lives in this district, I don't want us to put all of our eggs in the toss them off the ballot basket here. We've got some great candidates running, and this district has changed a lot. So here in Carlisle, until fairly recently, I was represented by the seat that was once Lou Barletta's. Once the Pennsylvania Supreme Court threw out those horrifically gerrymandered maps, which included Carlisle to Scranton as one congressional district, I got Perry. Since then, the district has changed a little bit more. And this time, I believe that Perry is uniquely vulnerable because not only these legal challenges, but, well, additional legal challenges, the FBI seized his cell phone. This is very abnormal for a sitting member of Congress to have their messages confiscated in a way like this. So I think that even Republicans are waking up to not only how extreme he is, but how clearly he tried to interfere with the peaceful transfer of power in 2020.
Now, we have a big field of Democrats in this race, and Chris mentioned a few of them. Is there any name that's starting to pull ahead of the pack at this point?
Sure. Well, as Chris mentioned, former TV anchor Janelle Stelson is in the race. She's starting with, I think, about close to 100% name ID. You don't see that a whole lot in candidates. Being on TV for 20 plus years does provide a unique advantage, but I think we're going to see a lot of money from a lot of national groups that may boost a couple of others. And this is really a welcome change. 2 years ago, we only had 2 candidates interested in running, and unfortunately, neither of them were able to raise the money it required to beat an entrenched incumbent. So regardless of who it is, the way that national money and the DCCC is focusing on this race, I think is going to make it a very, very different scene than it was in 22.
So outside
Hey, Larry,
go ahead, Chris. Yep.
How long have you been on TV? We can run you for Congress someday, right? Because being on TV is one of the best qualities a candidate can have. It helps qualify you. As Brittany says, it raises your name ID. So in that crowded, as of now, 8-way Democratic primary for the House in the 10th district, you'd have to say that Janelle Stelson is out there far ahead because she starts off with people already knowing who she is. All the other candidates are going to have to start off much lower and buy their way, in a good way, up to that name ID that Stelson has. So I would assume we're going to see some negative ads on Janelle Stelson. She does not live in the district. She was a registered Republican until fairly recently. And I'm sure the other Democrats are going to latch on to that. So it'll provide good fodder for people like us to talk about.
Well, Stelson's name recognition notwithstanding, how is she trying to define or shape her candidacy? Is there a platform emerging, or is it mostly just name recognition at this point and sit back and watch? What do you think, Brit?
Janelle had one of the best launch videos that I think that I've ever seen. She had clips of her newscaster career that she explained that she's seen the stories of the 10th because she's covered them for so long. She's met so many people. She knows what the pressing issues are for families in this district. So I think, the information that she has is huge, but then she also talks about what inspired her to run, and that was the overturn of Roe v. Wade and Perry's really hardline position on that now more than ever, having candidates that support your right to bodily autonomy is so, so, so important. And I think that is, as she explains it, her motivation to not only change her party, but to get involved in politics as someone who had been apolitical for so very long.
I have been flummoxed about, Larry, is that usually when candidates don't live in the district, they move into the district or pledge to move into the district. We've now had 6 months of Janelle Stelson talking about running for Congress. And even in they had a little mini debate a few days ago. She still would not commit to moving in the district. She lives in Lancaster County, which abuts the district, but is not in the district. So it's really going against the grain. I don't know if she will ever pledge to actually live in the district until perhaps the folks here elect her. So I think that is a real big opening for the other candidates to go after her and say, boy, she won't even live here, but she wants us to vote for her because she's been on the boob tube for 30 years.
She has been in our homes, though, for decades. So I think a lot of people are feeling that they would be better represented by someone from Lancaster than someone from the Freedom Caucus. And I think if it's a head-to-head of her and Perry, she's going to be able to make that case.
So, Brit, you don't think the geography matters much?
I love the 10th. I love where I live. I think that everybody should live here, particularly more Dems, so we can flip a few state legislative seats. But if she wants to live in Lancaster, it's not that far of a drive. I think she understands the issues facing our families.
All right, let's move on to another race that's going on in 2024, and that would be for U.S. Senate. And the incumbent there is Bob Casey, and his name is no stranger to Pennsylvania politics. And let's just do a brief review on Casey's accomplishments, or what does he bring to mind for voters?
Well, his problem, Larry, is that he doesn't bring anything to mind, and he really hasn't. And I think that has been both a help to him and a detriment. He has also been very lucky, not his fault. He didn't do anything about it, but he's run in very good years, 2006, 2012, 2018, very good years for Democrats, and he has benefited from that. So I think this year Republicans have a very strong candidate in Dave McCormick. It does not look like he will have a primary. So both candidates will be, basically starting the general election now. They've probably already started it. So that will be, I think, the marquee matchup in Pennsylvania and one of the marquee matchups in the entire country.
Britt, I want to hear what you think Bob Casey's accomplishments are up to this point. Chris doesn't seem to think he's accomplished much.
Well, I think that Pennsylvanians generally feel otherwise. The Caseys are like the Pennsylvania Kennedys without the bad behavior. They're so popular. They have been in office for a very long time. And Bob Casey has been a huge champion, particularly in healthcare. He was one of the lead advocates for the CHIP program nationally, the Children's Health Insurance Program. He was a huge advocate for the Affordable Care Act, providing people insurance through their parents until they're 26, prohibiting insurers from blocking you based on a pre-existing condition, setting lifetime caps on health insurance costs. Like, these things actually impacted Pennsylvanians, and they remember that Bob Casey fought for them. So, I think he's been very visible. I think he has represented us very well in DC, and I think that's why we're not seeing serious competitors. And I think it is quite a stretch to call McCormick a serious challenger when he was unable to get enough votes to beat television doctor Dr. Oz in a primary just 2 years ago.
What did you think of that performance after all 2 years ago? But Chris, what did you think when Dave McCormick had his last race? How well or not well did he acquit himself?
Well, he came about 950 votes away from being the Republican nominee. And again, we saw the power of name ID back then, because nobody really knew who Dave McCormick was when he started running, and pretty much everybody knew who Dr. Oz was. I'm sure Brittany spent a lot of time in her afternoons watching his show. So again, it demonstrates the power of name ID, because Dave McCormick had to kind of, start from scratch, and there was Oz having been on TV for a long time. So I don't understand how Brittany can say on the one hand that Janelle Stelson's time on TV is very helpful to her, but that Dr. Oz's wasn't. So I think we'll have more of an even playing field this year. It does not seem like, as of today, it's going to be an overwhelmingly Democratic or Republican year, but might be closer to kind of even Steven. And that would be a new experience for Bob Casey. And the reason I say that no one can think of what he's done is because that's what voters tell us in polls. I have worked for a U.S. senator in the past who is well known for a lot of things. And Bob Casey, maybe it's his superpower, I don't know, is not really known for anything. But he's been in elective office since the mid-1990s. This will be his eighth time running for statewide office in Pennsylvania, which is quite a feat. So we'll see if we can finally get him the eighth time.
So, Chris, as far as you're concerned, go ahead, Britt, go ahead.
I just want to draw a big distinction here between Janelle Stelson, an Emmy award-winning trusted broadcaster, and a TV crackpot who had to testify in front of Congress for the misleading medical information that he shared. I think those are drastically different TV experiences, but certainly it helps with name ID. But since we're drawing that comparison again, if it's a problem that Janelle lives in Lancaster, which abuts the district, I think McCormick spending the majority of his time in Connecticut is an issue that voters are very much going to care about.
Britt, before we explore your crackpot comment, I'd like to know more about Dave McCormick in an objective way as possible. In other words, who is Dave McCormick? Somebody give me a brief bio on him.
So he was born in Western Pennsylvania. His father became the first chancellor of the state system of higher education and was president of Bloomsburg. So McCormick graduated from high school up in that part of the Northeast Pennsylvania, was a statewide wrestling champion, earned an appointment to West Point, graduated there, served overseas in combat during one of the wars there in the Persian Gulf, came back, started a Web 1.0 business in Pittsburgh, later worked in the Bush administration, and went on to then run this large hedge firm, which is based in Connecticut. Along the way, he and his second wife married, and they have kind of a Brady Bunch situation. They have, I think each of them have 3 girls. So they have 6 girls, and the youngest are graduating from high school. So he has been very well received on the campaign trail by Republicans 2 years ago. But between Oz's TV fame, whether or not he's a crackpot, and former President Trump endorsing Oz, that made a 950 vote difference in our wild and wacky 2022 Republican Senate primary.
Britt,
so he is well credentialed. Sorry, go ahead.
Britt, that is your cue. Why did you call McCormick a crackpot a couple minutes ago?
Oh no, I meant Dr. Oz of TV medicine. So he had been selling weight loss supplements and drugs that didn't work. He was profiting off of them, and then was called to testify in front of Congress about that. I have met Dave McCormick. I think he's a very nice person. I don't think he's a crackpot. I do think that his hedge fund career is going to be a problem. The companies that he invested in have a long record of shipping American jobs to China, and that's not really what Pennsylvanians are looking for. We want somebody who lives here, who is truly from here, spends their time here, and keeps jobs here. And I know that Chris is going to jump in and attack Bob Casey for not having a private sector career. But if McCormick is going to run on this, he should run on the merits of it. Is he proud of what he did in those companies? Is that what he's going to advocate for in Congress, making it easier for companies to ship their jobs overseas? I think those are questions that need to be asked.
Democrats are allergic to the private sector these days, and what Dave McCormick did and what other hedge funds do is they make money for their clients, which include pension funds of unions and all that sort of stuff. So that's part and parcel of the private sector experience in America. Some jobs go by the wayside, and new ones are created. If the Democrats were on TV back when the car was invented, they would have lamented the end of the buggy whip. rather than embracing the newness of the internal combustion automobile. So progress sometimes is a little bit messy. As Brittany related, the next private sector job Bob Casey creates will be the first one. So we'll see what people think when they get, a full-throated message from both the campaigns and, let's face it, from a lot of outside groups that will want to play here. The national environment as it stands today, most pundits, and I would agree, think it's going to be easier for the Republicans to take back the Senate, given what the map is, than it will be for them to hold the House. But that's still a long way off. So you're going to see a lot of money in this race, just like we saw a lot of money 2 years ago in the Oz-Fetterman race.
Viewers, you can call us at 1-877-PA65001 or text us at 717-219-4001. Thank you very much, Chris and Britt. I'm going to give you a break just for a minute while we look at programming notes for here on PCN. On Wednesday, On the Issues has Representative Joe Dorsey on the subject of school funding at 6 p.m. Then right after that, at 6:30 p.m., our guest will be Christopher Paris, PA State Police Commissioner. On Thursday, Journalist Roundtable has Jan Murphy from Penn Live and the Patriot News, Ryan Dito from Trib Live and the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, and Patricia Loeb from KYW News Radio. That's at 6 p.m. on Thursday. Game of the Week and Match of the Week return to PCN this weekend. We'll have basketball on Friday when Notre Dame Green Pond takes on Palmerton at 7 p.m. Then on Saturday, it's time for girls wrestling when Parkland meets Easton High School. That's at 5 p.m., courtesy of Service Electric Network in Lehigh Valley. After that, we'll have Council Rock High School South's Escape the Rock wrestling tournament at 7 p.m. The public affairs coverage you watch on PCN is now free on the internet. Go to PCNTV.com and check out our streaming service at PCN Select. And PCN is a 501c3 nonprofit television network that receives no government funding. We rely on viewers and donors like you to help PCN continue to bring you everything Pennsylvania. To make a donation, visit PCNTV.com. Thank you. Now let's get back to our guests, Brit Crampsie and Chris Nicholas. And just a couple more questions about the U.S. Senate race. We were talking about Dave McCormick. So he's had experience running in elections past. As far as you're concerned, what kind of experience does he have now that he can apply to this campaign? In other words, how might this campaign look different from his last one?
Well, the last one was
primary.
Go ahead, Chris. You won the race. You go ahead. Chris, you're first.
The last race he ran was his first as a candidate. And regardless of what party you're in or what office you're running for, that's difficult to be a first-time candidate. Every experience is brand new, right? So now he has been through that. As I said earlier, Casey is now running his 8th statewide campaign. McCormick's now running his 2nd. That's not equal, but like any candidate that's been through it before, McCormick will be able to make faster decisions and better understand the ramifications of those decisions as well.
Britt, go ahead.
I think you learn a lot, like Chris said, in your first campaign. It helps not having a primary, so he's not going to face negative in a primary and then face it again in the general. So he's going to emerge less scathed this time going through the primary than he did last time. He's not going to have to spend as much in a primary, which is going to leave the war chest a little bit more full to focus on Bob Casey and to focus on November. So that is very, very different than what he looked at 2 years ago. But he's also going to have more eyeballs on him from primary to general. So when he ran against Oz, he was communicating with Republicans, talking to Republicans as a Republican. He's going to need to win Democrats and independents to flip this Senate seat. And I don't see a whole lot in his resume that's compelling for working class families. The median income in Pennsylvania for a household is mid 50,000s. McCormick is a millionaire. He lives in a huge house in Connecticut. He has funded companies, again, that are shipping these Pennsylvania type jobs out of the country. And if he wants to talk about how that's what private business does, I don't think folks that make non-million-dollar amounts every year are going to be interested in voting for someone like that.
All right, Brit.
Well, they have voted for Democratic millionaires before, so I don't think that's going to be much of a stopper. At the end of the day, they're going to vote about what's best for them. Do they want to give Bob Casey yet another term in office to do things that no one quite really knows what it is? Or do they want to try something new and fresh? So I think there's a real desire across the entire country, regardless of party, to get a new generation of leaders in. We're seeing that on the presidential level. That's one of the reasons Joe Biden's numbers are so bad. That's also impacting the Republican frontrunner, Donald Trump. So we'll see how that plays out. But the people are on edge, disgruntled, as I said before. And sometimes that leads people to say, you know what? Even if we throw the baby out with the bathwater, as the old saying goes, maybe it's time to do that.
All right, let's move on to a text question. We got it from Mike in Annville, and it's for Brit, but Chris, of course, you may comment too. The question is, who is the most vulnerable incumbent Senate Republican?
Senate Republican.
Like state Senate, you think, Brittany? Is that
let's say state.
Okay.
All right. Well, the most vulnerable seat, I would say, is Senate District 15. That is Dauphin County, but the sitting Senator, John DeSanto, has announced that he's not going to run for re-election. And then the next two, I would say, are probably a tie, and that would be the 37th in Allegheny County, currently represented by first-term Senator Devlin Robinson, who recently rose to a degree of fame after he used some profanity at a firefighter in a public hearing, and Senator Dan Laughlin up in Erie, who's held 2 terms in a seat that is very, very Democratic. So Laughlin has outperformed the registration in recent years, but Shapiro cleaned up in Erie, as did Fetterman, and the district has changed a little bit. So I think that that's a likely flip as well.
Go ahead, Chris. You may comment on that if you want to. Most vulnerable Republican in the PA Senate.
So right now, Republicans hold a 28-22 lead. So Democrats like Brittany Crampsie, who used to work for the Senate Democrats, think they can flip 3 seats. The seat here in Dauphin County, the 15th, was redrawn to be very, very Democratic. So they definitely have the edge there. The seat in suburban Allegheny County has always been a battleground. It's flipped in the last 3 cycles. Dan Laughlin in Erie, who has Erie City, is a survivor. I think if you want to look at seats where Republicans could go on the offensive for right now, I would think you would look at the 5th district in Northeast Philadelphia. That district voted Republican at the top of the ticket last year. So I think there'll be some interest from our side in that seat. But again, you've got the state house with a 1-seat Democratic majority and the state Senate very close. So it's definitely not going to be a boring year, Larry.
How about this, Chris? Our texter Mike did not forget about you, and he turned the same question kind of inside out for you and asks, who is the most vulnerable incumbent Democrat in the PA House?
Well, that 5th district is a newish senator, Democrat by the name of Dillon, who won a special election. So he has not, and that special election was in a different district. So he hasn't faced all of the voters in his actual district yet. Again, not his fault. And Republicans, I think the key is to have us hold a couple of seats we have now, where we hold them, even though Democrats have an edge in registration. The Democrats would control the state Senate now if they would hold all the seats where they have an edge in registration and performance, but they have not been able to do that. The Senate Democrats have been in the minority for more than 30 years, minus 1 2-year term. So they're kind of the Keystone Cops of Pennsylvania. politics. But again, it will be a very, very contentious race across the state for these state Senate seats.
Let's move on to another congressional race, and this would be the congressional district in the 7th District. That is the seat currently held by Susan Wild, who is a Democrat. What's going on in that race? Brittany?
Well, the Lehigh Valley goes both ways, really. It's a bellwether region of the state, and she's been a top Republican target for some time. The seat was held by a Republican, but it changed after the seats were redrawn. Susan Wild has held on to it with decent margins. I think Republicans have been unable to field a really compelling candidate, and Susan Wild has not only done well in Washington, D.C., part of that Fab Four of women that were elected when the congressional districts changed. But she also has a great reputation of constituent services in her district. And that's always huge, especially when you're newer and your name ID isn't as good. But I don't see any reason why we should believe that district's going to flip.
Brittany, does she have a challenger in April? Just to review that quickly first.
Not that I've seen.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Chris.
So she won election 2 times ago by 52%. She won re-election last time by 51%. So I would hardly go so far as to say she's put up good margins. She is the incumbent member of Congress in our delegation who has had the closest margin. So there are at least 2, perhaps as many as 4 Republicans running in that primary in the 7th District. The Lehigh Valley, where Brittany went to school, where her diploma right behind her there from Lehigh University. It's Lehigh and Northampton counties, and then a little sliver of southern Monroe County, and then all of Carbon County. The registration there, I mean, Biden got 49.1% of the vote there in 2000. He won the seat with 49.1%. So when you see that number and the fact that Wild won with just about 51% last time, I think in the general election, it will be the most contested seat in the state.
Let's move on to Attorney General. And that's interesting because the current Attorney General, Michelle Henry, has announced that she is not going to run for that seat. So it's wide open. I understand at last count there were 5 Democrats and three Republicans out there. And who's tending to pull to the head of that pack?
So that seat is open because our last Attorney General who got elected, Josh Shapiro, went off and got himself elected governor, and he appointed his top deputy to be the acting and now full Attorney General. But part of the deal was she would not run, Michelle Henry would not run for re-election. So you're going to have a raucous primary on both sides. As you said, there's a total of 8 candidates. The state row offices, Attorney General, Auditor General, and Treasurer. I always say that Attorney General is the first among equals in those 3 races, to coin a phrase from Winston Churchill. So it gets the most attention because you're putting bad guys away and all that sort of stuff. So it's the one seat right now that Republicans don't hold in those row offices. We hold Auditor General and Treasurer. So I know on our side, we want to get that. I know on the Democratic side, they've had that since 2012. So they obviously want to keep it.
We have just a few minutes left in our program, so let's turn to the race for president. We're going to make a full circle here because we had Berwood Yost pollster on at the beginning of the show, and he talked about some polling he had done in October of last year, and he pointed out that Joe Biden ended 2023 with a very low approval rating. So, Brittany, as far as you're concerned, what did he do to earn that rating? Try to be brief.
Well, I think that he is facing what Chris has talked about with voters being disgruntled and not really remembering all of the great things that the Biden administration did, maybe a little bit front loaded in the term, things like the Inflation Reduction Act, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. Those are going to see major investments into Pennsylvania. And I think we're going to remember the wonderful things that Joe Biden has done. But also, it's January now. So October, end of the year, the polling wasn't great, but it's trending better. I saw polling come out last week that has Biden ahead 2 or 3 points, and that's a swing from where he was before. So I think people are seeing these Republican debates and remembering what the alternative is, and Joe Biden is looking a whole lot better, not only by comparison, but by the policies and investments that he's made in states like Pennsylvania.
So what do you think,
Remember,
Chris?
Larry, back in 2016, Donald Trump won the state by about 40-some thousand votes. 4 years ago, it flipped back to Joe Biden by about 80,000 votes. That's a very, very narrow divide in a state that has 8 million plus registered voters. So Pennsylvania is one of the most purple states in the country in terms of the presidential race. So many states on both sides of the aisle are already figured out. No one's going to campaign in Idaho or California or Alabama. So there's fewer and fewer purpley states where what you can do as a campaign can make a difference. So we're one of them. There's probably no more than 6 or 7. So we're going to have a lot of attention. And I think the races, again, regardless of who the Republican Party nominates, will again be a very narrow race. Joe Biden's biggest problem is people think he's too old, and there's nothing he can do about that.
And briefly, while you have the floor, Chris, how does Trump's campaign in 2024 compare with that of 2020?
Well, again, he will be running and is running his third successive presidential race. So you think they've kind of ironed out all the bugs in their campaign apparatus. One of the good things for any candidate who's run that many times is people know who you are. That also can be a bad thing. People know who you are. I think that's what we're seeing now with both Trump and Biden. That's one of the reasons so many people are, again, if anybody's playing a drinking game at home, I'm going to say disgruntled again. That's one of the reasons, because both parties want new and better candidates for the top office. So that is what's kind of driving a lot of this disgruntledness.
I think one major difference in this campaign is that Donald Trump is having to spend a lot more time in the courtroom. He is currently under indictment for a number of issues stemming from his last presidency. So that not only is that a distraction, I think that as Chris talks about ironing out the bugs in the campaign, Donald Trump himself is the bug. He most recently last week was bragging to be the president that helped overturn Roe v. Wade, despite how unpopular that is in every single one of these battleground states, and even the non-battleground states that look like Tennessee and Kansas. So the things that he says and the things that he does are so problematic for voters in these states that could be toss-ups, that as we're more and more exposed to him on those rare days where he's not in the courtroom, voters are going to be turned off again.
This will be the last question. Chris, do you suppose Trump is getting any new supporters now? In other words, it is important to expand beyond his current base. Is anybody else jumping on the Trump ship that wasn't there 4 years ago?
You don't see that in the polling. You don't see that in the polling for Biden as well. If it's Trump-Biden again this time, as it was in 2020, it reminds me of trench warfare in World War I, where you had pitched battles over a very, very, very small amount of land. So both these candidates, if it's Trump again and Biden, they're very well known by people, and there's not a lot of new you can say about them yet. The wild card, as Brittany said, is all of these various court cases. That's unprecedented in American history to have that happening. So that's never happened before. It's kind of hard to gauge that. It would obviously help Trump if he's acquitted on some of these charges, and it would obviously hurt him if he's found guilty. The question mark now is we just don't know when the cases might ever start.
Brit Crampsie of Brit Crampsie Communications and Chris Nicholas of Eagle Consulting, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
PCN's Francine Schertzer talked to House Minority Leader Bryan Cutler about the Republican agenda.
We're joined today by Representative Bryan Cutler, House Republican leader. A few days ago, as we speak, the National Park Service had announced the planned removal of the William Penn statue from Welcome Park in Philadelphia. There was public outcry in the days following that, and you had issued an immediate response as well. That plan has now been retracted, but can you talk a little bit about why this issue was so important to you?
Yeah, this issue is actually very personal for me. My family actually was Quaker and immigrated here in 1685 on the ship the Rebecca, and they came through Philadelphia. So William Penn's vision of an inclusive society here and one with religious tolerance is very personal to me and my family. While we are no longer Quaker, we still do live in the same area that they ultimately settled in. And so that history is rich and deep, and it's one that I think that should be respected. I'm very glad that the Biden administration and the National Park Service decided decided to withdraw their current plans. And I had commented at that time that, Penn demonstrated what it meant to live in harmony with the indigenous people here. And I think that it would be completely appropriate to both maintain the statue and tell the story in its entirety, just like we do on the front wall of the mural in our own chamber, where the treaty is depicted on the left side of the mural if you're looking at the front. And I think that that's important. It's important that we tell the entire history, and I certainly think it's worth remembering those important lessons, especially for today.
You're sponsoring a House resolution to honor William Penn. What do you hope to accomplish with this resolution?
Well, we originally had drafted that resolution so that we could submit it during the comment period. Obviously, with the national parks quick reversal, that comment period is no longer there. I do think that Penn and his vision for a harmonious society is worth representing and commemorating, and I think that we can modify that as we go forward now, but I do think that we should still honor him, particularly as we head to the 250th founding of our own country here. I do understand, and it was a noble goal to try to increase interest here in the Commonwealth because Pennsylvania played such an important role in the early days of our own history. In fact, as many people might recall, our own founding documents and our own Constitution played a large part in the creation of the final federal constitution. So I think that that is something that deserves to be highlighted. I hope that as all Americans that we can look to that and learn those lessons and keep them close today.
Now, other than the governor's budget address, which is coming up February 6th, the House is not scheduled to be in regular voting session until mid-March. How do you feel about that?
I'm very upset that we're not in session. This is not the kind of calendar that we ran when we were in charge. We ran a very aggressive calendar. In fact, we had one of the busiest legislative sessions ever when I was both leader and then speaker. And what we've seen now is the complete opposite of that. We've seen a chamber that has really just quite frankly, underperformed. This is the least productive legislative session in any time, and it's in large part because the Democrats won't call us to work. And I think it's because they continually manage to the next election. They've had a series of vacancies that have impacted their numbers, and because of that, sometimes we're tied or they're even under us in total numbers. So their answer is simply to not return us to session until those elections are concluded. I think that there's plenty that we could agree on. In fact, I think that we were really unfortunate that we missed a lot of good opportunities with this budget. We saw the governor and the Senate come to an agreement, specifically in the area of education. Ultimately, that was stymied by the House Democrats, and then we were launched into a multi-month impasse. I think that finding that compromise is ultimately what people desire. We can all have our strong convictions, but at the end of the day, you have to govern, and in order to govern, you have to be present. And we've just not seen that from the current majority.
What are your caucus's priorities once you do return to session?
Well, when you look at our priorities, they're going to be a continuation of what we ran last session, as well as what we unveiled recently, and we called the Keystone Commitment. We understand the impacts that some of the federal and state policies are having on everybody's lives. We believe that we can have a thriving economy. We believe that we need to have a child-centered and focused educational system. We can provide safer communities, and we have to get the rate of inflation and the cost of living under control. Unfortunately, many of the policies that we're seeing coming out of the federal government with massive spending and massive borrowing, we just recently passed $34 trillion in borrowing. The federal government's essentially running on their credit card. And that's driving all of these other problems, compounded on top of the supply chain issues and the labor issues that were created by the poor COVID policies that we fought. So when you put all of that together, you've got a recipe where I don't believe anybody could look and say, I'm better off today than I was 2 years ago. And that, unfortunately, is a situation that could have been avoided because there are policies such as job training, workforce development, school choice, all of those things that we can discuss to prepare people for a better tomorrow. Education funding will absolutely dominate this upcoming budget cycle. In fact, later today, there will be a report coming out from the Basic Education Funding Commission. And there's a lot of disagreement there. Unfortunately, some currently are saying money alone is enough to fix this problem. But the truth is we've already invested billions of dollars of new money under Governor Wolf and Republicans in the House and the Senate into education, while at the same time we watch the scores decline. And that's not just because of COVID. COVID did negatively impact it. But that kind of turn was already starting to happen even pre-COVID. So if money alone is not the answer, then it's going to have to be a funding and accountability with some reforms. And we've just not seen that kind of willingness to have that discussion up to this point.
One last question. You referred to this last year's budget, which got finished up at the end of the year. Last year, the state blocked funding to the University of Penn's veterinary school, in part due to anti-Semitism concerns. What do you need to see from Penn in order to have the state reinstate that funding?
Yeah, a couple things. One, I think that the statements in front of Congress was completely unacceptable. And I think that everybody with a moral compass would agree that kind of equivocation in front of Congress to not denounce genocide of a people group is simply wrong. So that did absolutely impact their voting funding here. It's something that we consistently heard. So when you recognize the major role that agriculture plays in our state, though, we recognize the impact that the vet school has. So this is something that we're willing to work with the institution and get passed because we understand the impact of the funding and specifically a very large portion of our economy in the mid-state here, which is agriculture. So we formed a task force. I assigned some members from the House Republican Caucus to work with the school. And really what we're looking for is a statement and a condemnation of the genocide of the Jewish people. I think that actually violates their code of conduct. And I'm not really sure how it couldn't have, to be quite honest. And two, it would be actionable under that code of conduct. And then we're also looking to balance the free speech issues which come with that. So there are issues currently where some individuals feel that they cannot share their viewpoints, particularly if they're conservative, and that's a problem. So we're asking for some recognition from the administration on that as well. And then ultimately, there is a group of Republicans who were already working on a package of bills that deal with anti-Semitism and education and hostile educational environments on college campuses. We're looking for their input and ultimately their support on that as well. So I think that all of that would go a long way in ensuring that that funding could be reinstated. And then on top of that, obviously, budget season's right around the corner again. I know that you and I will be talking in about 4 to 6 weeks after the governor's budget address and then the upcoming hearings. So I know that this will be front and center again, and it's everybody's goal to get this done.
Representative Bryan Cutler, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Francine. Here's a reminder about Wednesday. On the Issues has Representative Joe DeOrsey on the subject of school funding at 6 p.m. Then right after that, at 6:30 p.m., our guest will be Christopher Parris, PA State Police Commissioner. That's it for the PCN Capitol Preview today. I'm Larry Kasper. Thanks for watching.